So I have all my Heron top pieces laid out. I did want to share with you, so I am taking the back hem and interfacing, and I'm actually going to cut that out of the fabric and make it the same size as my front facing hem and attach them all the same way. You can follow what the book does, or you can try it this way. I thought it was a neater finish that all three pieces that go around the bottom are all exactly the same. So this is 2 inches, and this is my back piece I'm cutting on the fold. So I'm just gonna double it and make it an inch bigger and cut it out in fabric. Okay, so I have cut out all my pattern pieces and I'm laying out and cutting. I just finished cutting my interface. Things to remember with your interface, make sure you're cutting a right side and a left side, so you're gonna flip your pattern piece. This is only one-sided because it has the glue on it, so you do need a left and a right of your collar pieces, and then of your front hem facings, you'll need a left and a right. And then remember, I am doing a separate back piece, so I cut out a interfacing for that as well. Like I said earlier, so I'm going to be attaching 2 fronts and a back instead of putting the hem interfacing directly onto my back. So moving on to step 3, this is I think a little bit of a tricky part, are these pivot points, and you should have marked these it was on your pattern piece, so pivot point on both of your front pieces and then the neck as well. So here are my pivot points that I marked, and what I did was I chalked a line almost a little under, it's a little under a ½ inch on each side of that pivot point. So from here to here and here to here are equal distance. And then I drew my chalk line all the way up to that pivot point on both sides. And I did the exact same amount on both of the collar pieces and then both on the front pieces as well. I think it's easier to draw this line, because then what we're going to do is you're going to stitch, and that's going to be your guideline. So on all 4 pieces, you're going to stitch right on that chalk line, and then it tells you to cut to your pivot point, and I'll show you after we stitch, but we're gonna cut that line right inside our pivot point. Okay, so I have stitched all 4 of my marking points. I'm showing you on my back side so you can see. Here's my chalk on that side, but it's hard to see the stitch. So I've stitched all 4 of those and locked and back stitched on each of the points, and then we are going to trim to our point. And you want to be very careful to get as close as you can to your point. I might have to go in with smaller scissors without cutting that point stitch. So you're going to do that on all 4 of these pieces, and you'll have an opening that will look just like this. Okay, we're going to talk about steps 4, 5, and 6. We are going to take our front facings that we just trimmed open, and we are going to sew them together right sides at the seam allowance. And then you're going to do the exact same for your front pieces as well. I've already sewn this one together, and then you will press both of those seams open with your iron. Okay, I'm going to talk about step number 7. You're going to be putting your fronts and backs together up here at the shoulder seam. And as you can see in the illustration, these right here are our little pivot points that we trimmed and cut out. So when you lay this out, you're going to be able to see the back of your fabric. This is the right side and that's the right side. And we're going to stretch and make that fit along here. Mine is turned the opposite way, so here's my collar. Here's where I sewed the pieces together and pressed them open, and here is the back right side of my fabric. So these guys right here are these right here in the illustration. You're going to line up all your notches, so you should have, I have this guy, and then there's another one right there. There's one, and then on the other side as well too. So when you start to pin, this is going to get kind of spread open at the top here to allow it to kind of fit and work on your joining those two sides together. So you're going to pin all along here. So I'm going to pin that right now, and then I'll show you, and then I'll kind of show you what it will look before we sew as well too. Okay, I'm all pinned all the way down, and I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and you're going to sew either 1.5 centimeters or a little over a ½ inch. And what happens when you sew, so I'm sewing along this line, it should hit your pivot stitch that you did earlier, and you're gonna kind of just follow that, and you need to make sure you get that little point and that you sew right through that. Continue on kind of following that stitch line from your pivot point, go over your back and along to the next pivot as well. And again, you want to make sure you catch just the very point of that, so it's not loose. There, it's actually connected together, and then follow along that all the way down. And what happens is when you sew this, and if you pull it, it will almost be like a straight line through there. It kind of is looking curved right now, but it should kind of match up with your other stitches from before. Okay, I'm ready to sew. So I'm at my, it's like 0.59 inches. Going to back stitch. And I will try to go through at least one pivot point so you guys can kind of see. What I was talking about. coming up on that right here is the start of that stitch that led to my pivot. And I'm just going to kind of follow that all the way through. You kind of want to make sure you get that flat, this part where your pivot is, so you don't get a little tuck on the right side. It's gonna go slow. Pull it back out a little bit so I'm kind of lined up with that other pivot line. And then I'm going to continue on and show you what it looks like when I'm done. Okay, here's what it looks like all sewn together. Here's that little bit of your back. It almost forms like a little triangle as well. And here you can see, here was my stitch line where I showed you guys, and I went right through that pivot point and continued on to the other side. I think I'm at like 0.59 inches is the exact what I sewed at. And then if you flip it to my right side, here is that corner, and I actually did this one pretty fantastic. This is my third one. So the first one, it got caught and I had to, which it might happen, you might get a little pucker, but you can just seam rip it out and push it down flat and then go back over it again. And if you miss the pivot point, so you flipped it and you have a little hole on this side, on that side, you can go over it again as well. Just go over the little pivot point and make sure you get it caught in there. So if I flip it, here is the collar. Step 9 is our straps, and super easy. You're just going to be folding it in half lengthwise on both of your short and long. You should have two. Here's my really long one, and then here's my short one. So you're going to fold in half, and I believe it's sew at 1 centimeter along the tops, and you're going to leave one end open. So if you start here and go all the way, you're going to stop here and leave this open end so you can turn it. And I'm going to go do that with both of these. Okay, I'm going to take a second to talk about the pleats. This is 10, I believe 10 or 11 in the book. Make sure that you transfer that pleat mark over. So here it is on my pattern. Very important that that's in there. And then I like to use carbon paper for fabric, and then it's underneath. And then you take your little tracing wheel and you're gonna follow that pleat line all the way around. And then you should have your mark for your pleat on your fabric. So I'm going to show this, how to fold the pleat on my pattern piece. So this is the right side of my fabric. And what you're doing is you're bringing this point to that point, and that's what they have the arrow for, to show you which direction to bring it. And you're literally going to fold and match these two lines together at the top and the bottom. So they form a pleat in the front, and then underneath, on your wrong side, is where that fold will be. So this is the wrong side of my pattern piece. So the fold should be on the wrong side, and then when you flip it over, and once it's sewn, you'll have that pleat on the right side of your fabric. So here I have my dart pinned, and then I put a basting stitch in, and that's going to go through both sides, and this is to help hold it in place. I think it makes it a lot easier to sew. So this fold is on the wrong side of my fabric, the actual pleat, and then when you turn it over, that's the right side of my fabric. So your fold should be on the wrong side of your fabric. Okay, next you're attaching your ties to the front of the jacket. Your short tie goes on the right side and your long tie goes on the left side. And just to show you, you should have marked on your pattern all the different notches. So you'll have the side slit, the opening, the tie, and then where you have your sewing line. So you can see that short little line right there is where I placed my tie, and then you'll just flip it over and match it up with your right side. If you guys did step number 2, you don't have to worry about this. I had said earlier in the very beginning I cut a back hem facing as well. So that's my next step. I went ahead and attached it just like my front hem facings, right sides together, graded my seam, and then pressed it, and it's all nice and neat on the inside and laying great on the outside. Okay, so I have pinned my front hem facings to the front of my jacket, but I wanted to show everyone kind of what it should look like. So this is my right side, and this is my facing. So I pinned my right sides together. And here are my straps coming out. Make sure that you pull those out so they don't get sewn underneath. Also make sure your pleat is down so it's not facing the opposite way. And then what's going to happen is you are going to sew all along your facing up and around your neck. Make sure that your hems meet, your two facings, both backs meet, and then you're going to keep going around and all the way down to the other side. And this is the step before. This is where we sewed the hem facing on. And what's going to happen is once we get that all sewn up, I'll show you, we're going to flip it, and this will all be finished on both your front edges. Okay, so we have sewn our facings together. Next, you're going to clip all your corners and trim the seam and clip into any curves so that when you turn it, it will lay nice. And after you turn it, you will press out all your edges. And see, this is what I was talking about. here's that hem facing that we attached. And then after we clip and trim and then press, it will lay nice and flat. Okay, moving on to our side seams, you should have marked on your pattern on the both right and left side a side slit, a sew line, a hole to leave open on the right side only, and then another sew line. So that's what you're going to make sure that you have marked. So this is my right side, so I have this side slit. So I'm not going to start sewing until the top of that side slit. And then I'm sewing the 2 notches. And then since I'm on my right side, I'm leaving where it says to leave open, and it says on the right side only. And this is so you can stick your tie through. And then you will sew the next line up. And here's my left side. So you're actually, again, you're gonna leave, here's your side slit. So you're not gonna sew this first part. And on the left side, you're going to sew from the top of that side slit all the way up to the marking, the last marking, making sure to leave, this is your actual armhole. And this will be sewn at I believe 2 centimeters. So this is a much bigger seam allowance on the armholes. And I suggest, as they do too, to try it on and make sure that you like how big the armhole is, or if you want to make it move it up a little bit, you can, or move it down a little bit. So here is my armhole pressed down and pinned. You can see I just folded that under so the edge is nice and neat. And you are now going to sew all the way around the armhole. And make sure that you have this part flat, the part underneath the armhole. You don't want to sew these 2 together like that. Make sure that it lays flat on your sewing machine, and you will sew your line all the way through and back around. Okay, step 18 is top stitching our hems down. I've already done my fronts. I just followed right along my serge line. If you did a back piece like me, you'll do the same thing. Just follow that same line over from your front, and go ahead and sew down the back piece as well, and you'll go all the way down to the other side, and then they'll all be stitched down, and you'll have a nice stitch on the front, and then go ahead and press that. Okay, we are on our last step, and that is to enclose the seam and hand stitch the collar down. I found it easiest to do it on my dress form. The first time I made the jacket, I tried to do it flat, and I had a hard time getting it to lay right. So if you don't have a dress form, you can use a hanger, a broad hanger, and hang it on that, and then I think it's a lot easier to tuck and pin it. So I have everything. You're gonna push all this seam allowance up under the collar, and then you're going to fold over some seam allowance on your top collar, and then that right there will create a nice finish. So that's all getting tucked in there. And then you have these pivot points right here. And again, you're just gonna turn that under and stitch that down to this shoulder seam. And then it'll be all finished. And then again on this side, see there's all that seam allowance. So you'll tuck it and hand sew that down. And you'll have a little bit of the pivot point. It's really hard to get that tucked in there, that corner. So you'll see some of that a little bit when you hand sew it, but then you're just gonna sew that to that seam line, hand sew all the way across, and that will finish your collar. And then it will be all done and ready to wear.